The next innovation we did at Starbucks was customization. We're in that Nashville focus group. They were having such a hard time with Starbucks. They kept talking about, I just want to love Starbucks, but I don't know how to order. I don't know how to order a beverage at Starbucks. I don't know how to be part of the crew. Like there's this caramel macchiato, and I don't know what that is. And we're like, caramel macchiato. And
yeah, right.
And we came with this whole idea. We went back and did some data research and realized if we could teach people to customize their products, if we could teach them to order very complex beverages, they became more loyal customers. Our most loyal customers had the most complex products. So we launched this whole campaign. It was probably my first time being in front of Howard Schultz around customization and how do you get into the product. And they still use some of that as they enter new international markets today, but it exploded the category for us. And it's learning innovation through serendipity and learning it through just kind of listening to the customer. And we came up with a little book. It was called a customization booklet. And it told you how to order your product. It told you how to pronounce the products. It was really a guide to become a Starbucks customer.
Tom Barr, welcome. And thank you so much for joining us.
My pleasure, Paul.
You and I have known each other for a long, long time, but there's nothing like actually doing something like this to let me go back and dig around and root around and see what I can find out about you. And as I was preparing for this, I saw something that made me laugh. And it was early on in your career, where at Starbucks, you had the title Director of Hot Beverage. And which I think is just funny because I thought that's what Starbucks did, but apparently it was its own thing. Tell us a little bit about how, and I should also point out to everybody, this was pretty early on in your career and you got a big, big job.
I did.
Talk a little bit about how that happened and how that felt.
One of my, we'll talk a little bit more about my leadership, but one of my leadership principles is embrace serendipity. In the Starbucks story, and you'll have to cut me off if I go too long, because the Starbucks story is all about serendipity. The funny ending of the being called director of hot beverage is I made my wife call me the hot director. But that's a side note. No one at work, just my wife. But I was at GlaxoSmithKline. I was dating my future wife, and she had just taken a job. A gentleman named Andy Jassy had called her to come over to a small company called Amazon selling books. And that was in '99. We had just started dating. She moved out to Seattle to work for Amazon. And I was left in Pittsburgh at GlaxoSmithKline, waiting for how we'd ever come back together. And just serendipity, we're kind of trying to figure out what's our next steps. And a recruiter calls me. It's about a small coffee company and about 2,000, maybe 2,500 locations at that time to take a job at Starbucks. They were hiring me for a product manager of a product called Frappuccino, which is a fairly new product for them at the time. Blended beverage is what the job was. And when they gave me the offer was so low in compensation. I was like, this can't be the right offer. I can't accept this. And so they came back and they said, well, we do have another job open. It's a category manager of espresso. And I didn't know much about the coffee category. I didn't even drink coffee at this time. And so I said, well, what does that do? And they said, well, it's all the lattes, all the espresso beverages, all the coffee brewed beverages. And I looked up the company. I'm like, well, that's your entire company. That's like 90% of the company. And they're like, yeah, but it doesn't include the food business, which is like 5% in this blended beverage business. And I said, okay, what's the comp for that? And they gave me the comp and it kind of worked out. So I'll take that job. And so I show up in Seattle.
Wow. And
I thought, for this type of job, with a well-established company, you'd be like probably meeting with the CEO and all that. But I met with my future boss, Michelle Goss, who's now CEO of Levi, and got this job. And then became the category manager of espresso. And that became, over time, they added a few more products and became the director of hot beverage. And so just by chance, and by the day I showed up, she said, oh, where are you living here in Seattle? How's the relocation going? I said, well, I moved in with my girlfriend. She goes, you have a girlfriend out here? She goes, I had no idea. I said, well, you guys never asked what would be my reason for wanting to come. So very, very much serendipity and a very cool title.
Well, knowing how spectacular your wife is, if they had known it, they would have been able to cut the pay in half, and you still would have taken the job.
I think that's what she figured was on the relocation package. They could have been a little tighter.
Yeah, right. Exactly. How old were you when you took that job?
Oh, geez. I was probably, let's see, that was in 2000. So I was about 30, 32.
Yeah. So a relatively young person coming into a pretty big job.
Yeah, it was a fantastic opportunity.
And so talk a little bit about, um, so you have a big job, you're trying to figure things out. It represents, I wouldn't say do or die, but like the category was the business in a way, right?
It was.
And so a lot of eyes are on you. But one of the things I think you did there was figure out how to think about product and how to innovate um, based on product and figuring out how to add revenue and revenue growth through that. Talk a little bit about how you went through that process, showing up sort of, I'm sure, drinking by the fire hose, as it were.
Yeah, I mean, Starbucks is a really young company at the time. Like they had just launched, or when I arrived, my first job was to launch their first holiday product, the
Huh.
first kind of innovation, or it was an innovation, line extension. So it was a gingerbread latte. And so I was kind of jumped into that launch, launched gingerbread latte. But that was the first time they'd really had a promo product. It's so crazy now because they come with a promo product like every 2 days. But it was the first time they had had a promo item on the menu.
Hmm.
So every holiday season, they always had eggnog latte, but that was just kind of like a historic product. But the first time they were launching a new product, so I came in, launched that, and realized we got a revenue bump from it. So I was like, hey, this is a real opportunity for us. And so we started this whole, we thought it was innovation at the time because we'd never done it, of this line extension innovation. So we did the toffee nut latte the next year. And then the year after that, we're like, okay, we need a October product, a product that really can get us going into the holiday season. We sat down and we tested two products. So good. The story's worth the wait on this one. We tested two products. One was called a double chocolate mocha, and it blew out the other product. The other product was called a pumpkin latte. Tested them. We looked at the research. Myself, Michelle Goss, and the product manager I'd hired at that time, Peter Dukes, all sat down in a room and we looked at the data. The data said launch the mocha, the double chocolate mocha. And we talked about it. We had a meeting and we said, there's just something about pumpkin that's going to take off. We just believe it's the spirit of the fall. And so we said, well, it can't be pumpkin latte. It's not original enough for Starbucks. We had spice in there, Pumpkin Spice Latte. We launched it the next year, and it has become what it is. It actually, at the time, you don't even realize that pumpkin wasn't a big product at the time. There was maybe like a pumpkin loaf, but that's it. And so it just kind of exploded the pumpkin world. And then we had to have fights with the operators of like, they wanted to keep it on the menu forever because it was such a big hit. And we're like, no, part of the magic of it is taking it off and bringing it back. And so we kind of won that battle, launched that. And then it went to, the next innovation we did at Starbucks was, talking about just product and innovation. I'm sitting in a Nashville focus group, and we're doing new menu boards. So that back then, all the menu boards had these little chips on them. If you remember these little chips.
Yeah, right. Sure,
like
yeah.
The old train systems. And we're trying to do paper-based a menu board. We're doing research to make sure we put the right things on the menu. And we're in that Nashville focus group. They were having such a hard time with Starbucks. They kept talking about, I just want to love Starbucks, but I don't know how to order. I don't know how to order a beverage at Starbucks. I don't know how to be part of the crew. I want to, like, there's this caramel macchiato, and I don't know what that is. And we're like, caramel macchiato. And
Right.
And we came with this whole idea. We went back and did some data research and realized if we could teach people to customize their products, if we could teach them to order very complex beverages, they became more loyal customers. Our most loyal customers had the most complex products. So we launched this whole campaign. It was probably my first time being in front of Howard Schultz around customization and how do you get into the product. And they still use some of that as they enter new international markets today. But it exploded the category for us. And it's learning innovation through serendipity and learning it through just kind of listening to the customer.
So you listened to the customer, you came up with this thing, you sat down with Howard Schultz, and then you had, I don't recall this, but of course now it's so fundamental to what
Yes.
Starbucks does. Like there was an ad campaign.
Yes. And we came up with a little book. It was called a customization booklet. And it told you how to order your product. It told you how to pronounce the products. It was really a guide. Which were about maybe at this time, probably about 2,700 stores, maybe 3,000 stores. It was really a guide to how to become a Starbucks customer.
Wow. And you handed those out at the stores?
At the store. And they still hand out in international markets at times.
Is that right? So like a jillion of those went out.
I still have a couple I should find.
Oh, you do? Yeah, I was going to say probably up on eBay, right? You probably have like so that's actually really interesting. And so what you're saying here is that you did research. So actually these two stories are really interesting. One was you got a bunch of research and it said, do the double mocha. And you're like, I'm not doing that. We're going to do this instead, which, I'd like to understand like what happened in the room. You're like, I'm just going to take this, whatever, this costs us $100,000 to do this study and throw it over your shoulder. And then the other one was, hey, we saw that and we saw this in research and then we did it. And it turned out both to be right, which, is interesting. So,
well, it's interesting. I'm not sure if you could do it today at Starbucks, because at that time, you had a pretty new person in their career running all of hot beverage. I'm reporting to, a person my same age running all of beverage for the company. We're making the decisions. It was kind of like, it was the Wild West a little bit in the Starbucks world. It was cowboy time. It was very much,
really,
you didn't have bureaucracy. You didn't have to go to a whole bunch of meetings to justify your decisions. I'm not saying Starbucks is that way today, but it definitely wasn't that way back then. And we just kind of came up with the idea and started running it. And no one really knew that we made that decision, because it was between myself, the vice president of beverage, and the product manager of Espresso.
Really? So, but take me back to that room again, just for a moment, because I think that's really interesting. You're sitting there with the three of you, and like, were people nervous about? Were your folks nervous about like, hey, wait a minute, we're going to throw away the research and do this other thing? Or help me understand how everybody felt in that. Do you remember?
I don't know if we were wise enough to be nervous about it, Paul. Like, now, first of all, it was our research was probably, it wasn't $100,000 study. It was probably like a $15,000, study on concept study. So it wasn't like they tasted the beverages or anything like that. But I remember the room. I mean, it was Michelle Goss's office. We're in there. We're surrounding a table. There's three of us. We're taking through the research. There's like 3 or 4 concepts in the research, but those two were the top one was that double chocolate mocha, and it was that pumpkin spice. We talked through it, and we kind of talked. I think we were going to launch a double chocolate mocha. I think we all started there. And then as we kept talking about it and kind of talking about how you'd market it and how you talk about it, we kind of just started getting really excited. I wasn't sure if it was Peter or Michelle or myself who had the first but then groupthink took over, and we all said, okay, groupthink in the right way took over, and we're like, let's go pumpkin. And then we thought we had to come up with a better name for it than just pumpkin latte.
And were you trying the drinks at the same time, or is this just
paper? We were just looking at paper.
Wow. Amazing.
And back then it was truly paper. There wasn't even the computer. So
yeah, right. Exactly. That's a crazy story. So then, okay, so fast forward, and then you have this other situation where you looked at the data and you realize that people don't know how to do it. And it's what's powerful about that, I think. And it's a great reminder of why, I mean, we're very, as you know, we're math guys over here, Violet Growth, and like, it's always about the data, and you want to look at data and see what the data say or whatever. But what you guys closed in on is the foundation of all great innovation, really, which was a very emotional thing, a visceral, emotional thing. And I think it's, who is it? There's a comedian who has this piece about going in and trying to order at Starbucks, and he's just nervous because he doesn't really know how to do it. Or
people were nervous about ordering them.
Yeah, right.
It's like, I would say it was pulling on a string. So you're in a focus group. You're not really talking about your beverage customization or anything like that at that point. You're talking about the menu boards and how things are listed. And it was having the courage to pull the woman back in who was doing the moderator of the focus group and said, hey, can you dive deeper in that? And as I pulled on that string, then we went back to Seattle and said, how can we determine if people who customize are actually more loyal customers? Because we didn't have the Starbucks card or anything like that at that time.
Yeah. How did you do it?
We were going back to POS data and trying to track down through the data, like who is the most profitable customer, and like who orders the same type of beverages every day.
So did you guys do that through credit card data and
I don't think we had credit card data at that time. I believe it was just truly matching up, taking a few stores and matching up the customers in a
wow.
way. I mean, it was basic because we didn't have the tools of, I can't, I wish I'd had better notes of how we actually did the data pulls, but I remember the data clearly showed us that if people had more customizations, more like additions, like extra hot versus, not saying anything, that they were more apt to purchase. And there, we decided to make a campaign, and we just took off from there.
So it's interesting because it's a mix of, hey, I got it the way I wanted it, but a lot of it was being part of the tribe too, right?
I think more being part of the tribe at that time than anything else. Just because people really didn't know how you order. They'd say, like, this is, I wish I knew the whole cadence again, but there's a cadence for how you order a Starbucks beverage. And if you ordered it wrong, the baristas would correct you. Like if you said, I want a double tall, but you said I want a tall with double shot. They'd be like, no, you want a double tall. And so there's a whole cadence that and so imagine you're being corrected by your barista in the morning. You're like, oh, wait, I feel bad. I'm not going back to that place. So it was letting them be part of it.
I love that. Nate Bargatze, that's who it was. Nate Bargatze has this great thing about trying to order and just having a really hard time, which is so him, right? Whatever. But he, just really, this one thing where he would order something and they couldn't understand what he was saying. And so he'd order it. And instead of going back, he was too embarrassed to do that. So he'd leave and throw the drink away and then go to another Starbucks, which was like a block away, and try again. And you're like, and really speak.
He was too embarrassed. Like
too embarrassed.
You were too embarrassed. Or they correct you. And it's
that's a powerful, but it does speak to an important thing about data, which is things can be hiding in plain sight. And you actually have to take a moment it's not, and actually we're seeing this a lot in how AI is being used by a lot of our folks. And I'm sure you've seen this with your folks too, is you can ask questions, but not be curious and get an answer and move on. Or you can go, what is this weird, what does this tell? There's something else in here that I have to poke at. And it's such an important skill, I think.
You just said a key word, and I had a great, where I started at Starbucks, having being in the presence of Howard Schultz and seeing how his mind, one of the great founders of our time's mind, worked. And curious is a key word. He would always say that. I want people to be curious. I want you to be curious. Like he'd get mad if you didn't follow up on emails, like all the solicitations you get. Well, back then it wasn't as many as you get today. And he really wanted you to follow up on almost every solicitation because he's like, be curious about what somebody's doing out there. Is there a piece of magic that we haven't seen? And kind of building as young executives. And to this day, I think I'm curious because I work for him and kind of learn that, from, and I think most founders are curious. I think they ask, I just read, talking about Maria's first boss, Andy Jassy's, a shareholder meeting where he's talking about the asking of why, like the asking of why, being curious. I believe that's how most great ideas get going is if you didn't see it, but then the questions led you there.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's really powerful. So, okay. So you do that, and Starbucks is a great run, right? And they grew, from the years you were there for 13 years, grew an enormous amount, right? So you're in a very high growth.
Left. I think there were 18,000 stores when I left, something to that level.
Oh my God, that's crazy. So take a moment on, and again, this is a little off topic, but it's just a fascinating thing. Like that kind of growth, what allowed that to happen? What do you think the key elements were that really made, obviously Howard figured large as a leader and so on, but what do you think the main components are that allowed that to happen beyond the making of a new category?
I think that, the category came at a time that people were wanting more togetherness, more like, community. Starbucks started as, very much a community coffee house, had that feel to it. Everyone, we used to do, whenever we did like focus groups, people were like, I never had the time to sit in Starbucks during the afternoon, but I really want to. And so they envied the people who would sit there with their newspapers and having a cup of coffee. And, our cafes were not nearly big enough for everybody to sit down and be part of that community. But it was the desire to have the day where I could just go sit on a Thursday afternoon at 2 o'clock and pretty much do nothing that people envied, and I think helped that kind of culture get going. And that third place that Howard always talked about was truly a catalyst for growth. But the real catalyst for growth is Howard, his curiosity, his push. He was never ever kind of happy with where we were. Like, he's always pushing for, like, what's the next idea? How do you keep going? How do you meet the customer needs? And I think that with big personality can ignite a culture. And I'm sure that most these great companies that we talk about, these great founded companies, have somebody behind it that is just they never want to stop. They never want to stop that growth. And I've taken that with me and my new companies, as we'll talk about later. But I believe that growth solves so much evils. And what I mean by that is, if I always tell my team here, like, I don't want to be a company that's counting paper clips. When you're counting paper clips, it's over. Like, you're just you're either growing or you're in a long-term decline. You just don't know. And sometimes it's a fast decline, but you're either growing or you're declining. And if you can grow, you can make a lot of mistakes. And Starbucks made a lot of mistakes. For every pumpkin spice latte, I did a beverage, I forget the name of it, that was, was way off and really messed up. And I messed up because I messed up with the baristas and how I launched it. But for every one of those great ones, you have one that didn't work. But if you have good growth, you just kind of move on from it. You don't have to sit there and
cogitate too long about it.
Yeah, exactly. Great way to say it.
So you grew up in this culture in a way. I mean, you were a relatively young person. You had done other jobs, but of course, big chunk of your time and a lot of your capabilities were grown in this environment which is basically a fast growth environment, right? And a super successful environment too, obviously. You said something important about it, is the culture. I've always believed that, CEOs are stewards of culture.
They are.
As a critical component of what they do, because you can't be there for every decision. You got to be able to set a foundation so great people can find their way using a set of guidelines and principles to make the right decision for the company. And obviously, Howard did that incredibly well. Now I'm referring to him by his first name, which I think is,
If you met him, you quickly would, because he's very personal.
So, okay, but this is an extraordinary thing, and when you and I met, actually,
yes,
you go from this incredibly vibrant and successful company where you had a big job, where you delivered incredible results, and you go become, I think originally a president, but maybe a CEO, at a startup, and in the hot days, right? And it's a different thing altogether.
It is. So, probably, I was with Starbucks for almost 13 years, or right at 13 years. And at that time, the company's grown up. It's 18,000 locations. You're looking for taking your expertise. I guess I'm, somewhere in my early 40s at this point. And how do you grow it? How do you use it? So I signed on with a startup named Halo, which if you're in London, you probably know the name, or Dublin, you probably know the name. But the goal was to grow Halo, which was one of the first ride-sharing apps, competing with a Uber at the time and Lyft, but out of Europe. And their gig was, they were only in taxi cabs in Europe. So they were using the taxi infrastructure for their ride sharing. And they were going to come to New York and compete against Uber, who was very, was in about 4 or 5 cities at the time, but they weren't who they are obviously today. And so they hired me to be the president of North America. So I moved to New York. It's kind of a funny story. I moved to New York. My family's still living in Seattle. So my wife's still working at Amazon. So she's there. I'm in New York, 2 young kids. And I start this, I forget the actual day, but it was somewhere in January of 2013. And the day I start, Uber launches UberX. They say, we're not just going to be in sedans, black car sedans. We're going to do this UberX model. And I'm like, that's kind of curious. I don't even know anything about the category, really. I'm just still learning. As you know, UberX really exploded that category. It wasn't, the sedan model's always been great, but there wasn't the sedan model. It was the UberX model, really making everyone an individual taxi driver, at the day. And we were trying to launch with taxis in New York. and we were up against the infrastructure of the taxi community, which really they did not want ride sharing. They didn't want Uber. They didn't want us. They really kind of fought us at every level. It's an interesting story that I go really long on, but I won't.
No, do tell us. We can always, yeah.
They did not want us, and they fought us at every avenue. And I tell you today, had they embraced Halo, the taxi cab medallions, so it's an old system, everyone knows a medallion system, cost about $1 million to get a new medallion because there was a limited supply. It was whatever, like 15,000 of them or something like that. And you couldn't get any more. So these people would buy these medallions. These corporations would buy medallions. There's a whole submarket of financing medallions, and they'd gone from it, when it probably started with like $5, all the way up to $1 million. Someone would sell their medallions because of ride sharing and Uber, and they're not embracing their own ride sharing program. A medallion today is less than $100,000. It's totally exploded that category. It totally blew up that category. And so I always believe, like, if they just embraced Halo instead of trying to fight with us, they might have, maybe it wouldn't be a $1 million today, but it could maybe be a couple 100,000. So.
Well, and it's funny because you saw something else really, really important. What they, and again, I'd be curious to get your opinion about it, but at a high level, Uber succeeded because they solved a number of customer facing problems with the taxi business, right? You could see when your car was coming. You could probably, I'd love to get your ticking these off, but when you regulate and calcify a particular category, there's some good things about that, but it also creates, you get what you get, right? And you can end up having decay in that space and so on. I mean, I don't know, when taxis first emerged and the fact there was a meter that was regulated, that was real value actually at the time, long ago, right?
Oh, because before that was, just getting somebody's car. Like there's no regulation.
Right. And I told you it was $10. It's actually $40. You can't get out of the car or whatever, like crazy stuff. And that's enough to kill a thing. So, you had an innovation that created an institution or a structure, and then Uber comes along and Lyft comes along and an enormous amount of capital and says, you know what, and also they, as we all know, they were pretty fast and loose about trying to go around stuff that they weren't supposed to.
I give them a lot of credit. I mean, they fought the regulation. They fought the entrenched system. We were trying to ride within the system. And at the end of the day, the person who fought the system actually won the battle, quite honestly.
Yeah.
And you say you can't fight City Hall. They fought City Hall and won.
Yeah.
I'll tell you, from there, I was asked it was pretty well funded at the time. Halo had raised $125 million, which at that time was a good chunk of money to raise as a AB round. And I was asked at that time to work with the founder and become the co-CEO. So we worked together. They moved me over to London to kind of run the day-to-day business as the co-founder was more the visionary on the project. And my family at this time moved to New York. So my kids would joke. They said, as I'm working every week, I'd fly out on Sunday and fly to London and come fly home on Friday night. My kids were like, Dad, if we ever move to London with you, you're just going to go to China. You're trying to escape us, but a family joke in our, that was
true. Yeah, right.
But I ran Halo for a couple of years. We had a good London business, a good Dublin business in the taxi cab area. We could really never compete against an Uber and a Lyft. So we ended up shutting down our North America operations, consolidating up. And at the end, we ended up selling to Daimler for their Free Now product, which was My Taxi Halo combination, which it's funny. I'm waiting for a check in the mail someday. It just sold to Lyft. So Lyft just bought the BMW Daimler program, and that's going to be their entrance into Europe. So somewhere now I'm part of the Lyft organization, which really this is a really interesting story because we were trying to sell ourselves to Uber at the same time that Lyft was trying to sell themselves to Uber. So we're both like, I'm meeting with the head of biz dev. We're trying to sell Hello because we're running out of money. I guess Lyft was really struggling at that time. And I would say through just not having, thinking that you could crush your enemy rather than buy your enemy, Uber did not permit the purchase of either one of us. and now we're back together.
Oh, isn't that interesting?
Probably the major competitor of Uber, and at least in the U.S. for sure, but probably going to become in Europe now.
Yeah, interesting.
They could have bought us for a dime, and they could have bought Lyft for a dime. Can you imagine the money they've wasted on it was really hubris, I think, at the end of the day. It's the reason they didn't buy Lyft. So,
Well, every strength is a weakness, and every weakness is a strength, right? I mean, the same kind of hubris made them think that they could go against cities and states across America and beyond, right? They're like, and they did, right? So they were right about that part and wrong about the second part. But I want to take a moment on that because I think it's you had a particularly challenging leadership job there because you weren't the CEO, you were the president. You had a CEO who was less of an operator, but a great visionary and had done built something to a certain point. But you kind of had that the sort of managing up and dealing with the board and being on the hook to try to make results in a very, very tough environment, right? I mean, you guys were, you're competing against somebody who's extremely well funded and doesn't have all of the constraints you have dealing with the taxi guys and everything else. Talk a little bit about how you managed to keep your team. How you led in that role? How did you figure out how to get from A to B there?
I think I grew a lot. I think I'm a much better leader today because of the experience.
Mm-hmm.
I think that the one thing that you have to, when you're the underdog, is you have to give your team the belief that they can grow themselves out of this. The belief that you believe that there is a win in there, and that I learned very, very clearly at Halo, that you had to keep my engineers, keep my my support teams all excited about the future, even on those moments when you're like flying home from London, you're like, this is not going to work. Like, like you're not, you have your own disbelief. You're obviously, and you learn that as the leader at that time, as I'd become the primary CEO, everything rests on your shoulders, and you can't literally let them see you sweat. And I think I did that very effectively. But at the end of the day, the headwinds were just too much. We're bleeding cash too fast to not sell it and emerge my tax.
Yeah. Well, you got it sold too. That's not nothing because it was I actually remember those days. It's funny. One of the things I think maybe is a great reminder for a lot of our operators who are listening is that it is much more of a game of inches and it's much more touch and go, even for the stories that we hear about that succeed. I mean, so if you're in that moment, recognize that you're not alone. That's, and sometimes if you try to do hard things, it can go either way. Right. But there's such a success bias that we have, where we only talk about the winners or whatever. And a lot of stuff doesn't work. But it's the same set of skills that get you out, right? I mean, I think one of the ones you're talking about here is so critical. Is you just have to be willing to stay positive, keep everybody moving, and recognize that it's not linear. What I found often, and I'm sure actually even thinking about, we're going to talk about Sono Bello, which is one of my favorite stories.
Yeah.
What you did there, but it's not working, and then. It's not like it's a little bit, it's not regular progress. It's basically, it's crickets. It's not working at all. And then all of a sudden you find an angle and then you can start to pop. And so that ability to remain resolute and it's a lonely thing, right? Because you don't have, you have a limited amount of people in the company or maybe nobody in the company you can talk to about it, but that's a critical part of finding your way through. And it's something you've done.
And I'm a great believer that you have to throw a lot of spaghetti at the wall. You really do, and there's two camps. There's like have just one message, and just go after it, and don't move from that one point, strategic point of view. And there's people who you have one point of view, but you also try different things as you're going there, just trying to make something else work.
Yeah.
In Halo, that's what I brought to the group is like, let's just keep trying different ways. And we moved from taxi cabs into ride sharing. So we started doing ride sharing and I got pulled back from that. I still believe that Halo would have had more success had they gone that way than just trying to be in taxi cabs by themselves. Tom would you never know. You never know what would have been.
So then you go to Sono Bello, and Sono Bello is like uh, first of all, an incredible success story, right? But talk about moments where it got really, really, like really tricky. But one of the things that I recall about our, we came out to visit you a couple times and chatted with you, and you had some very, very talented executives working with you, and something that Sono Bello did, um, I think really, really well is they're very, very good at using data to figure out how to be efficient as you scaled. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so Sono Bello, first of all, is the I do my little bit of television commercial for you. It's the leader of plastic surgery in the country, probably not the world. We have over 110 locations. We, 180 plastic surgeons or surgeons working for us. So we've got big scale. At least in this category, a category that's not much talked about. And quite honestly, when I came to interview for the job, I had left Halo. My wife had gone to take a job back in Amazon, so I left Halo, and recruiter called me about this, plastic surgery center. It had 16 locations and pretty much the West Coast. And I'm like, I don't know anything about plastic surgery. I know I need it, but I don't know anything about it. And I sat down with the founder, and I found a visionary, someone who had a kind of an idea and a dream. And his name's Chris Parr. And we went to dinner together, and we ordered the same thing, and just by serendipity, and the same drink even. And we're like, oh my God, I was like, this is a partnership made in business. And so I tagged onto it. And I came in, his first exercise was, tell me how you grow this business to $1 billion. So I took it home and worked on it, just before I got.
And at that point, it's not, how big was it? It wasn't
about 100 million.
Yeah. So you 10x it. How do I 10x it?
So I'm sorry, it was less than 100 million at the time. So sub 100 million. And so we had 16 locations. And so I came back with this whole idea of how you build scale through expanding sales offices, at the same time expanding surgical centers, going into new products. And he hired me. He liked the plan. He hired me. I came in, went to work, and we've scaled this thing to, like I said, over 110 locations. We're well over $500 million in revenue, moving towards our $1 billion mark. We've sold a minority interest to private equity of Brookfield and Alaris, who are supporting us in our journey. And it's been a great win, great ride. But always took the playbook from Starbucks a lot on this one. So I call my Starbucks, they call employees, they call them, partners. We call everybody team members. We call Starbucks, you call your headquarters national support. We call it national support. So I owe Howard maybe a dinner for my success here. But one of the things I took was this ever focus on growth. And all I ever talk about with my team is growth, growth, growth. So guys, we don't want to count paper clips. We need to be out there growing. We have to find new avenues. We need to find ways through our problems. And that growth philosophy, if you stopped any of my directors and above, they'd probably tell you, this is a growth company. We're about growth.
Mm-hmm.
And the second big innovation I took, outside of just talking about growth, is finding a higher purpose for the business. Mm. And I'm a strong believer in this. If I have one message to any executive who's starting off a company, is trying to take it from, maybe not from the day one, but trying to take it from day 5 on a 100-day journey. Day 5, what to do is find a higher purpose for your team of what you're trying to accomplish. So when I came into this company, we were about growth, but we're about like the financial recognition that you get from growth. So it's a lot about, what's the revenue this month and how much revenue are we doing? And that works for a while, but as the team expands, just revenue growth by itself, as you get from, a couple hundred team members to 1,000 team members to 2,000 team members, doesn't have the same excitement. Partly because they're like, well, I get paid no matter what the revenue is today. And, I understand Tom likes growth, but why do I care? So we went away in 2018, 19. I started really thinking about, what are we doing for our customers, our patients? And I came away, I was reading our reviews, and I realized that we're actually transforming their lives. We're giving them new confidence. So a woman, about 85% of our business is female. She comes into us not feeling great about herself. And she's standing up in front of a conference room giving a presentation, or a podcast looking at herself, and she's not feeling the confidence that she wants to have. And that has an effect on how you present yourself and how you
Mm-hmm.
move through life and how you embrace friendships and all that. And so by helping them with this issue, feeling better about themselves, we give them a renewed confidence and thus transform their lives. You know, and what we talk about, we don't count patients, we count transformations. So everything in our business is about transformation. How many transformations did we do last month? We did 5,000 transformations. How many have we done in our history? 350,000 transformations. And that, a team, if you're a nurse sitting in Omaha, you can get behind because you know you're not just working for the revenue of the company, you're working to help that patient in front of you change her life. And with that comes some revenue. And with revenue comes a little bit of EBITDA, and that all works out to be a good cycle for everybody.
Yeah.
Then I've taken that, if I can go one step further,
Yeah.
and I said, because we're high growth and we're transforming our patients' lives, as directors and above, we get to transform careers. So we get to take people who probably shouldn't be starting as category manager at Starbucks coffee company and give them opportunities to do things they've never had because we're still a small to medium sized company. We're still allowed to make mistakes. We don't have bureaucracy. So this patient transformation leads to career transformation, and career transformation leads to more growth, which leads to more patient transformation. And that's kind of our flywheel for us. Patient transformation to career transformation keeps feeding each other.
That's great. And you know, it's interesting. You point out something else which is really critical. How many folks do you have? How many folks work for Sono Bello?
I guess we're about 1,800.
Yeah, yeah. So you know that nurse who's in Omaha, that that purpose also shows up in what she's doing right then with that patient.
That's
As
exactly
a
right.
you know, put aside the revenue, put it, you know, but there's a purpose in it, and that it shows up in all those little ways, which of course, you know, both you and I know that actually has a profound impact on growth and profitability because those are the touch points. There's a great, I think SAS had this. This was many years ago, but their metric that they used were customer touch points. All of the points, all these micro moments that occurred, they thought of it. They thought about that thing, and how do we figure out how to make those moments all good? And it comes back to culture. It comes back to a variety of things, and you know these where we touch customers is that's all they know, frankly, right? I mean, why nobody cares about the back office. Nobody cares about whatever. They care about those moments and those, particularly for anything facing consumers. You know, frankly, arguably this is true in all business. It's all everywhere, but certainly for consumer facing businesses, it's such a critical part.
You know, so I'll share. I send an email to the entire company once a month. You know, kind of at the end of the month or the beginning of the month of how we did the month before. And the email used to be, "This is how we did against revenue." And now they're now. So think about it, an email would say, "Great month. We beat revenue plans by $1 million. A great month." What's that mean to that nurse in Omaha? Now I'll say, "We beat plan and we served 100 more transformations than we expected to. 100 more lives were changed because we all showed up and did our job this month than we expected to accumulate." It's a much better message for them. Even on the downside, I don't say, "Hey, I missed by," hopefully never by $1 million, but we missed by $100,000. I'd say, "We missed 10 possible transformations that we planned to do. We didn't get this. We didn't serve those 10 patients that were looking for a change of life with us." It's just a much more powerful message than, you know, the company made its revenue target.
You know, it's interesting too, because it also ties into, it combines the combination of being able to get the sale in, but also delivery, right? So when you're thinking about transformation, it isn't about just getting the check, right? It's about delivering the service in such a way that delivers that promise, right? And so unifying, this is something that we've seen in great companies often, which is that if you're only focused on revenue or you're only focused on sales, you end up with a sales organization.
Which is good. There's nothing wrong with that. But the sales organization might inspire the sales team because they are inspired by the win of being a sales organization. But if you also need a bunch of nurses and doctors, surgeons, and front desk people to deliver this, we're not selling a widget over the web. We are selling a service. And I need at the end of the day, that nurse who is interacting with that patient to keep that sale together, to keep that patient as excited as she was the day she bought, the day she's doing pre-op, or the day she's coming in nervous that she's about to do surgery. Like, and that nurse is not inspired by, we're going to make plan by $100,000. She's
Right.
inspired by, I'm changing that woman's life. But I'll tell you, I've had to say it at least 1,000 to 10,000 times before I heard it repeated back to me. Now, I'll tell you, I believe, and maybe it's false belief, that everybody in my company now talks transformations, but it was a couple of years of just pounding it. I mean, just every speech, every presentation, every email. And I think my executive team said they believe, but they do today. But they kind of went with me because I'd correct them. Hey, you didn't talk about transformations. You called them surgeries. You called them procedures. They're transformations. And over a 3-year period, we finally got there. And now, 6 years in, 7 years into this, everyone uses it everywhere. But it takes everything from the CEO. They have to give. They have to believe. You have to believe more than is rational to believe in what you're trying to sell.
Right. No, that makes sense. For large organizations, bigger and bigger and bigger as a leader. I mean, and frankly, this is what they say about politicians too. You got to, it's the economy's stupid. You have to stay on message, right? Even though when you're sick and tired of saying it.
That's right. That's exactly right. And when you get off message, that's what throws you off. And even in your darkest days, you've got to get, when our darkest days were, COVID, we had to shut down, as everyone did. You've got to keep going back to that message, even when you're like, it is about revenue. We've got to get something in the till, but you're like, no, I got to stay on message. I got to stay on transformation, because if I lose that message, I might make the month, but I'm not going to make the growth that we really want.
Yeah, actually, well, COVID's an interesting sidebar, and I think before we get to that, one of the things that I think I've seen you guys do really, really well, and I brought it up earlier. And actually, thank you for providing some context, because people may not know what a Sono Bello is you guys are always very efficient at being able to use data to make good decisions about acquisition, to stay efficient.
Yes, we are.
Talk a little bit about how that emerged. Was that was always true, or is that something that you developed as you came in?
We've always been, we've always been very good at, before I even came, of our waterfall management. So we call it waterfall management. People would call it pipeline management, but it's, somebody sees a television commercial or a Google ad or, some type of media, they come through, they contact us through web form or phone call into our patient ambassador center, not a contact center, but our patient ambassador center.
Right.
Some people would call a call center, but we wouldn't. They contact us. We know exactly what the percentage of, from lead to appointment should be. Then from appointment to what we say consult, so showing up at the center, and then from consult to sale to surgery. And so we know, sale to really transformation. So we know that exact numbers. We know when we're off on it. We know when we're doing well, and we manage that data and those metrics by center and by collective centers every day, every single day since the day I started. So that was here before me. I do think as the CEO, my job was to continue it and to continue the push and the understanding of it, and to making right decisions based on it. Which is helpful. It's helpful to have that type of data to make your decision.
Right. Well, and then, and it's also, we've also seen it could be a crutch, right? Because you can be slow to test. You can be, it's working well. You don't want to touch it. You sort of have a desire to not upset the apple cart, but you have to try new things. But then things happen, as they say, because it's a family show. Things happen. COVID happens. You go to a situation where the business is doing great, and then COVID shows up, and everything changes.
The great story of this. So no one knows about COVID. Like you're thinking, we thought we were going to be shut down for 2 weeks. Like, so we're a medical company. We're using PPE. So we can't use masks. Like the country's struggling. So there's nothing for us. We have to close the doors. We close our doors I say, well, so Chris Parr, who's my founder and chairman of that company, I'm like, Chris, we're going to close for 6 weeks. He's like, 6 weeks? I said, yeah. We'll let this COVID thing fly by us in a couple of weeks, and then we'll kind of regroup and we'll reopen, just fresh start after COVID. We'll let COVID go by and we'll be done. I mean, how naive we were at that point. It was just crazy. And 6 weeks later, we're about to open up our first center. So we've scheduled. We realize COVID's not going to fly by. But we have to find our reopen. We get a we get ready. We open up Salt Lake City is the first center we open. So we open up Salt Lake City. It was a really good center before us. We felt it'd be a good center, to test out, to see if we put back on, search, will anybody show up? I mean, who knows? And I remember sitting there, and the first day we reopened on 8 a.m. and I get an email from my director out there, and she's like, "Oh my God, people are showing up for their consults." I'm like, "Really?" And so I call her up and I was like, "So what's happening?" She goes, "Well, we just sold our first patient." And I'm like, "What are you talking about? Somebody bought liposuction today? 6 weeks into COVID, somebody bought it today?" And she said, "Yes." It's like, I am wiping down fruit in my garage.
Right.
I just had no belief that, maybe the customers would come back, but they did. They came back in a terror. People really wanted to focus on themselves and focus on feeling better about themselves, especially in this moment of COVID that we didn't believe. And then the doors came off because we couldn't keep up with demand. It came so many people were at home, so many people were on Zoom looking at themselves all day, that it just exploded and helped our growth.
So this is like a fascinating thing because all of us sat there when this happened, and so many cases where you thought you knew what was going to happen, right?
Had no idea.
And it was and frankly, it was often the opposite. If you were a bread machine maker, who knew, right? But you're going to sell every bread machine. If you're, other cases where, and I remember talking to you about this at the time while you guys, it was pretty fraught because you're like, oh my God, this, it could have been the end, right? Because if people had decided, you could argue, if I'm wiping my fruit down, I'm not going to get surgery. I'm not going to, and I have to be careful of money. Like there's a whole set of things you could say about why no one would ever show up. And then it turned out to be, I can recover at home, right? Which I probably was a big part of it. Right. And your point is you're on Zoom and you got to figure it out. And people decided to invest in themselves and so on.
They had some free money. They weren't spending money on restaurants. They weren't spending money there.
Right.
The government was giving them some money at that time. So people were, they were a little, better on their credit situation at that time. And it was an interesting learning because everything you thought was going to happen didn't quite. The big things, and this is a CEO story, is you're in a crisis like that. I'm sitting there trying that 6-week period, trying to figure out how I'm going to pay my bills. Like, you don't know. You're a high growth company, and you stop. We stop on March 17th. Everything at one moment. You're like, this is crazy. And then all the bill collectors come in. So everyone wants to get paid, and you're just like, hold cash. We got to hold cash because we have to reopen. We need to get a reopening going. And I'm sitting there like sweating it out, talking to it was like 100 local TV stations about like how I'll pay you tomorrow for a hamburger today, and I'm looking outside, I'm sweating, and everybody's walking their dogs and hanging out in the streets. I'm like, I am, and the CEOs, as many of your listeners will know, you're sweating it, and you're watching the world just kind of live on around you. And it was
it's kind of a wild thing too, because, Halo was not, ended up turning out okay, but it was a pretty rough time. And then you take this new gig and you guys are doing really well pre-COVID, right?
Yes, we were our best months ever. We're going into COVID.
Doing great. And here you are, and it's shaping up to be a great year. And then, you're sitting in there in your sweatpants. I don't know if you own sweatpants. I certainly was sitting in my sweatpants going, I have no idea how these lines are going to cross.
I have no idea. But you said something about data. I won't go back to your data for a second. I believe the data tells us the direction we should keep heading in all the time. But I also at times, and this might be opposite from what you hear from others, I believe you have to tell your teams on certain projects to suspend looking at data, to build the curiosity. And go. Don't let the data tell you to stop. Go after the project. see where it goes, see what happens. You probably didn't pick the right direction up front, and the data is going to tell you to stop doing it. Where if
Mm,
you keep going, you might find that crazy idea of customization or pumpkin spice latte that you didn't know was hidden in there because you let the data stop you. Now, on the core business, the data is going to drive the day because the core business is I mean, that's how you pay the bills for the experimentation. But on experimentation, don't let the data always direct your path. And that's a hard message for people because everyone on the core business is running, off the data.
yeah. Well, it's a really, really good, but certainly as people look to try to open new channels and like a great example that we've seen again and again, you guys were always pretty big in TV and you'd been able to crack the code on TV, but a lot of companies, growth stage and middle market companies are trying to add upper funnel channels. The data originally, to start off with is going to be terrible, right? It's not going to be working. And so you can't immediately say, we couldn't find it because you know, many things you try will not, most things you try don't work. You were saying earlier, you try one works, one doesn't. It's like one works in our experience, 20 doesn't work, right? And so you want to quickly test, try it out, not spend too much money on it, but also try to find the learning in it. Because all of those things, it's about a learning agenda and trying to, all right, didn't work. The data say it's not going to be the thing we're going to scale, but like what was in there that maybe I could use to organize the next test?
We're doing that right now with podcast. So podcasts, we've been trying to crack the code on podcasts as an advertising vehicle for the last 18 months. And as we sit today, it's now a great channel for us. It's become we found our audience or how to talk to that audience through pod advertising.
Yeah. Yeah. Right. And it takes time and you have to have that. But it's really important actually to, as leaders, to make sure that we don't, uh, we have those dollars available to try these things and not apply the same type of rigor. It's a different type of rigor. It's actually, as you point out, it's curiosity, right?
I've done it an interesting way. I have a head of marketing. He's just celebrated 8 years with me. He's fantastic. He is a data junkie. He follows the data. He runs the business off the data. So what I do is I hold back a certain amount of pot every year. Is Tom Barr's innovation budget, and I force him to spend it on things that he doesn't believe will work. So, we might spend, it's not a ton of money. We might spend, $10 million a month on advertising, and he might be about $100,000 that we hold back. But that's my budget, and it doesn't have to perform. That 100,000 that does not have to perform, which drives me crazy at times. But that's where we experiment, and we just
That's right.
see, did we hit something? Did we? That's how we got any. We weren't doing any YouTube. We're like, oh, YouTube will never work. We tried it; it's never going to work. And then we kept hammering it with our $100,000 budget, and over time, it's become a very good vehicle for us.
Yeah. That's such a huge idea. And I tell you, we see this too. If you're a very data driven company, it can create, without that thing, you can over index into it and you can get calcified and stuck because you're like, every dollar has to work. It's like, no, every dollar doesn't have to work. We have to make sure is the core dollars work to fund all the dollars that are not going to work.
That's right. That's exactly right. And then you have to have a dreamer, and I'm a dreamer, so it helps.
Yeah, you are. You are. Well, that's a perfect place to stop.
Thanks.
Tom, this is awesome. Thank you so much for making time. And yeah, I know you have to get back to doing transformation, so I'll leave it at
Oh,
that.
you helped me a lot in my career when I was at Halo. I really appreciate the guidance in some of my darker days when you can't talk to the team members about it or to the employees at that time. You were a person who listened to my complaints and my self worry about what we were doing, and I appreciate it. So happy to be on the podcast.
Right on. Right on. Thanks, Tom.
Thank you.